I appreciate that. And I just kind of, when I started writing, I made like a bet with myself that I would never use like a common saying or like a kind of a cliche thing. So like one of the things that's fun for me, that's like a little activity, is like to try and build or create my own, phrases or, common expressions that aren't common. They're just for me. But I feel I just kind of, there's this, you just kind of smash down the dam of what goes from here to here and then, or here, so I was pointing at my fingers, and then you just kind of let it flow. And sometimes it lands, and sometimes when you're editing a day later or months later, you're like, Jesus, what were you thinking, man? You crazy. And that's why you edit.
Everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have someone joining me from my country, which is always great. I get to travel the world, but when I get to speak to a Canadian on the podcast, it makes me super happy. Corey Croft is on the podcast, and he's out promoting his book. He's out promoting what he's writing. And if you have ever done like a day job and try to do all the things most normal people do 9 to 5 or during the week, and then also add writing to your portfolio, you'll understand that Corey's got a lot going on, and the fact that he has time for us, I'm so happy. So Corey, welcome to Living the Next Chapter.
Hey, glad to be here.
It's amazing. It's good to have you here. One thing I noticed about your websites, your social media, you're a walking story just on your own without having to write down anything on paper. You got some amazing tattoos. You got some artwork all over you. Can you tell us some of the stories behind what you carry on you all the time? Because like I said, you're like a walking story, just yourself.
Yeah, I mean, mostly what's kind of, painted on me is for other people or in the memory of other people to celebrate or to kind of keep them at top of mind. You know what I mean? I'd say a lot of them are probably more on the sad side, but at the same time, it drives a smirk out of me when I'm able to see it, And I mean, I've been doing those for about 20 years now. I started pretty young, over 20 years, really. Yeah. So I've had a lot of them longer than I haven't had them, At that point, right. It's kind of strange, but that's how I look at it, at least.
Yeah. So with your tats and stuff, there's stories behind these, right? They're not just random things you're picking out of a book at a tattoo shop. You're like, oh, that's cool. Let's try that one. No, there's something behind these. So story must be important to you. Otherwise you wouldn't be doing any of this. So as a writer, I kind of leverage that as well in asking you like, how important is story in all that you do as a writer?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think of it two ways. I mean, for me, they all have very profound significance. You know what I mean? Like for me, everything is connected to a memory or connected to an experience of some kind. They all have their own, story. I don't judge, or I don't, I don't pay any mind to people who do it for aesthetics or just pick out of a book kind of thing. But I think that's also where, for me, whatever I write, whatever I put down on paper, whatever I publish or whatever I share with the public, for me, it also has to have some significance behind it. It has to have some kind of impactful meaning that, touches me to the marrow and makes it worth sharing, makes it worth, putting a needle in your skin, makes it worth saying out loud, makes it worth putting into, concrete letters and allowing the world to see it. So for me, there has to be some tie or link to my heart and to my soul whenever I write something down and whenever I want to share it.
Yeah. And again, we talked when we started off the podcast that this isn't your main gig as an author, and it's not how you generate all of your income. It's something you do on top of everything else. And your time is limited. You got stuff going on, but you still make time to write. You still make time to create. So there's something about this that hits a nerve for you and makes it you want to make time for this, where you could be doing a number of other things. So again, why is writing so important to you then to make so much time for it?
Well, it's actually funny because if I had it my way, if we were just paid to do what makes us happy, then I would spend
Mm.
all my time writing. I'd turn into a skeleton at the desk because on one hand, like it makes me happy. And I don't use that word very lightly. To me, that's a word that for one reason or another, like I feel people throw around, kind of like hilarious or, those exorbitant or extravagant kind of words. But for me, happy is really difficult to come by. For me, happy is pretty elusive and something that, authentically is quite rare for any of us. So for me, like I'm actually happy when I write. I feel productive. I feel like I'm purging demons and I feel like I'm doing something
Mm.
that I'm able to share and it will have a lasting impact, not just on me, but on people that I share it with, audience, readers, and whatnot. So it's more like I don't make time for it. I make time for everything else, because there's a whole business side to writing too. And there's family and relationships that you have to maintain and forge that unfortunately I've seen a lot fall by the wayside since I started, doing this because I just want to spend all my time doing that one thing. It's such there's just that feeling of being complete, the glass isn't half full or half empty. It's dripping onto the table and down onto the floorboards. So I do almost everything else begrudgingly, almost everything else begrudgingly. So it's more like writing will tend to get elbowed, out of the way to make room for, putting bread on the table and, being a human.
So as a writer, like as I listen to you talk, you're writing with your words. I'm following you along. I'm like, wow, I can picture what you're saying as you talk. It's great. As a writer, though, what do you find is easier for you as a writer, and what are some things that are more difficult for you as a writer?
I mean, as a writer, I find just the feeling of writing and it's natural. It's like a it's like a dolphin, in the water. I feel at my strongest. I feel at my most powerful when I'm writing. I find other things. Like I've lost the ability to be social. I find difficult. The ability to try and network, and then everything that kind of twists and mingles with writing, other than just the act itself, I find not laborious, but I find it to be very anxiety inducing because on the one hand, you're, testing your metal, you're actually putting it out there to the world. And that's fun. It's exciting. It's like, the peak of a roller coaster. You're about to go down and you see kind of what happens, right? When your stomach lifts up into the back of your throat.
Yeah.
But the difficult part is definitely just the marketing, the promotion, and the branding, and all the things that kind of come with contemporary art in general. You just you can just kind of maintain that escapism of creation, whether it be painting or drawing, sculpting, writing in my case. But it's the world around you is going to keep turning. So it's kind of important to, not get, not get sick, not get nauseous, and try and, keep up with the flow.
Yeah. So for those who haven't read your works yet, Corey, what's your genre? What are you writing in? Can you give us some overview about what's important to you as a writer?
Well, my genre, it's kind of swift and changeable because I'm interested by many different things. Like I'm a fan of multiple genres. Like I don't have one consistent, sci-fi or romance or whatever genre that like I'm dedicated to. So I'm influenced by a lot of different authors and a lot of different media in general, different art, So my genre is technically called literary fiction, but I've written absurdist fiction, satire. The most recent book, Scumbag Rehab, is like a crime fiction novel, but it still maintains those absurd, almost hyperbolic elements that make it, so over the top. But I think that's the one thing that links all my writing is that I'm writing it. And I can't separate myself from my own shell, but people will tell me that like, okay, it's a very different book. However, it still has that you in it, still has that certain voice or that there's, my writing's a little dark it has a very kind of, there was a lot of black comedy to it. So there's a
Hmm.
certain kind of like this certain thread that kind of runs through all the stories, I guess, and that's me. That's what I put into it. That's my individuality.
Hmm. Okay, so where are you finding your inspiration from then?
Hmm. I mean, that can come from anywhere. Like I've been inspired by like so many things in my day to day life and the grand scheme of the world. Like just song lyrics and just experiences I've had and secondhand tellings of the story. Like everything, if you're open to it, everything is inspiration. And if you're there to document it, to like journal how you're feeling in a particular moment, it almost teleports you right back there and allows you to experience it over again, whether that's good or bad thing, you know, because there's a lot of good and a lot of bad that happens. But for me, I think that I'm very inspired by reflecting on certain emotions and feelings, allowing yourself to be open to them, and then just trying to create a metaphor out of that or allowing a metaphor to create itself and kind of diffuse all these difficult or really hard things that we go through in a day-to-day life. And me particularly, I spice it up with I guess a little of that dark comedy and then send it out, on the water.
Yeah, who is inspiring you as far as another author or a creative person out there that you kind of look to when you need that little shot of inspiration? Who is it for you?
Yeah, author wise, like I've said this before to like a lot of my friends and on my Instagram and stuff like that. Like the book that got me writing was Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, because just the way he breaks down like characters, not just in a cerebral way, but on an emotional, level, it really hit me. I didn't know you could do that. There's every author that inspires me has shown me this new door that I didn't know you could do that I didn't know that didn't realize that reality was this malleable or that you could punch a hole through the atmosphere and crawl into this other dimension of creation. So like Kafka, showed me a lot. And Cormac McCarthy is a huge influence on me. Bukowski, another massive influence on me because all these people, these artists showed me they lit these torches down these otherwise dark, you know, caverns, these abysses
Yeah,
that I didn't even
yeah,
know existed. And all of a sudden you get to go and explore all these new wormholes. And it's a crazy feeling to be able to add that to your repertoire, throw that, arrow in your quiver.
yeah. I find finding out where people draw inspiration. It kind of is this like a recipe, kind of a little bit. It's
Mm-hmm.
like you're a little bit of this person, a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of this person, mix it all up, and that's kind of you, right? There are little elements of people that you draw from, and sometimes it's subtle. It's just little. It sort of pops
Yeah.
up. You're like, oh, I got that from that. Yeah, that's kind of cool that kind of happens.
100%. And like also like there's family members you grew up with, like some people
Yeah,
say like, oh, you're just like your mother. But like I know, like I can tell you, like off the like my uncle, my uncle Dan had an incredible sense of humor, just this really cartoonish sense of humor, and I know that I got a lot from him. Like I can see the people that I got things from, and also, I one of the bigger influences is just the fact that am I dwell on things a lot. Like I take things inside and I hold on to them for a long time. And if you start, I find this when you have a familiarity with a person, you start giving them nicknames, and then those nicknames have nicknames, and all of a sudden there's like 6 degrees of separation from the name like Mark to the name like Spoon. So for me, it's having these things that, occur maybe over and over again, or these certain events in your life. And you think about them so much, or you think about things so much that you develop this like sense of beyond familiarity where you're giving them nicknames or they're becoming something completely different.
yeah. When you write, are you writing for yourself or are you writing for an audience?
I write for myself and then I edit with an audience in mind.
Oh, I love how you said that. Okay,
Definitely.
do that. Say it again. Say it. That was perfect.
I write for myself and then I edit for the audience. Because I
Hmm.
think that if you're not writing for yourself, if you're kind of putting on. And I think you're not putting your full weight into it. You know, if you're writing with someone else in mind, it's not gonna feel good coming out. Like it's not gonna do the, let's call it therapy, that for me writing does. And you're not gonna have a horse in the race. Like you're definitely not gonna like have any, you're gonna have less, bonds linking you to the story. Whereas when I edit, I clean it up, obviously, for the audience. I want to make it streamlined and I want to make it readable and I want to do those fundamentals. But also there's no point if you're speaking to somebody and you're not understood, it feels like you're just running your hand, into a concrete wall until you're nothing left to your elbow. So for me, at least, like there's an equally important component of wanting to be understood, which is a definite dogfight sometimes with myself.
So out of your books that you have, where's a good starting point? Where would you direct a brand new reader that wants to come and fall in love with all things Corey? Where would you send them?
I mean, for me, I always kind of ask people what they read or what movies they like, or, when I meet them, to tell them which one, because Coward was the first book that came out and it's like a social satire. And then Furies came out and that's like a very action packed, but very sentimental, young adult, fiction. And then Buddha is it more of like a psychological existential thriller. It's heavy. It's really heavy. And so I've had those three books to kind of offer people to be like, okay, maybe you'll like this one. Cause if they're more compatible with the material inside, then they'll kind of, if they enjoy the voice, like that one kind of guiding thread that is stitched throughout all the books, then maybe they'll want to read the next one. So I just try and find out, like, what do they normally read, or what kind of person they are, what are they open to, you know what I mean, before. And now I have Scumbag kind of out, so I kind of direct everyone to that, and then just, bite my lip and be like, oh, I hope it's not too much for them.
Too much in what way?
It's pretty, it can be a bit vulgar. It can be a bit, over the top. So there's a lot of cussing and there's a lot of violence, and it's very much like I wanted to create the book version of what it feels like the first time you saw a Quentin Tarantino movie. Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, that era.
Yeah.
And I wanted to really take away I really wanted to create something gritty and dark and real, but still, has that comedy element to it and a clear, hopefully understood, absurdist element to it, because it's books, it's characters, it's imaginary, it's fantasy. So at the same time, when you hover the line of that is very close to, fact, fiction and fact, kind of, they start to marry. If they get too close together, then it can, for me at least, I wanted to make sure that this book was going to be like, okay, it's clearly a story and not how this guy really feels.
Yeah. When you're writing, are you writing in pictures in your mind, or are you writing in your words? Like, how do you, if I could like peek into your brain as you're writing, like, what are you seeing? What are you feeling as you write?
Oftentimes, so there's two things, there's, on one hand, there's sometimes it's, plucked from my memory bank. So we're trying to like get back in there, close the eyes and establish the scene, the smells, the tastes, how'd you feel at that time? What were you wearing? The textures, what was the wall like against your shoulder when you backed up into it? And other times it's just purely imagination, pure imagination. You're just creating this cinematic approach in your head, and it's like a memory. And you kind of start to doubt if you weren't really there, even though you've never been to Delaware or wherever you're kind of putting the characters. But you can, and then you can fuse the two. Fuse the two to become one. So it's this mesh of like what's something that really happened, with something that just completely exists in your mind, and you make that nice little snowball out of it. It's beautiful. I
like the can fuse, confuse. I'm thinking, Wow, I've never actually put those words like that and thinking of it that way. You just made my mind go, hang on, pause. Just let's process that for a second. So that's good.
Well, that's why I hope I don't lose my marbles, because otherwise I'll start thinking I'm like a detective just roaming around the projects,
Corey, when you talk, you're like almost everything you're saying is like you're painting with your words. Like you talked about a dolphin and being in your element and finding power there. And I'm like, I'm in the ocean. I'm watching a dolphin. Like it's like you're doing it for me in the podcast. What I'm seeing in your books. It's interesting how you process things verbally, like here on the podcast. It's great. I love it.
I appreciate that. And I just kind of, when I started writing, I made like a bet with myself that I would never use like a common saying or like a kind of a cliche thing. So like one of my things that's fun for me, that's like a little activity, is like to try and build or create my own, phrases or, common expressions that aren't common. They're just for me. But I feel I just kind of, there's this, you just kind of smash down the dam of what goes from here to here and then, or here, sorry, I was pointing at my fingers. And then you just kind of let it flow. And sometimes it lands. And sometimes when you're editing a day later, or months later, you're like, Jesus, what were you thinking, man? Crazy. And that's why you edit.
Yeah. For young authors then who are looking to you, you've got multiple books out. They're just starting today. Like they were literally just began their journey as an author. If you could have a little class with a bunch of young authors and share some inspiration for them, maybe things that you wouldn't hear from a typical author, what kind of things would you encourage them? How would you do that?
One thing I learned is and you can do this at home, is to have a separation between your workspace and your non-workspace, your leisure space, if you want to call it that. Because I find that, like, I work at home. I don't like working in cafes. I get too distracted by watching people, and then I'll end up like just writing pages about like what people are doing. And I'm very fascinated by people. So what I do, I work at home. Now, when I first started writing, I wrote several novels from my couch and my coffee table, just because like that was easy. And I liked the breeze coming in from the window. And I got a desk. I didn't pay for it. So I got a desk, and I started realizing that this is when I'm at my desk, this is when I'm working. This is when I'm working on the business side or the writing side. And I can separate that because I refuse. Like I will not allow myself to sit at my desk if I'm not going to write or do business. It's the workspace, Also wear pants, It really helps. Like it really helps to
please wear pants.
To get dressed like you're going to an office job or however you are, but don't be too comfortable, because you have to realize, like, because we'll work on computers. Everybody has Wi-Fi. Everybody's got like cell phones and stuff. So if you are putting yourself into this disciplined mode of work, then you're there to work. You're there to do your 1,000, 3,000 words per day, your solicitations, your letters, all that kind of stuff. So you can separate, even in your own home. You can separate, your work you from your leisure you. And one more thing, just related to what I previously said, is you gotta, to write, for me, what's helped is to just continuously open my mind. And we all have that little voice that kind of shoots out and makes a judgment, or, kind of like if we see someone, it's hard for us not to judge. It's hard for us not to make this claim or to assume we know everything. And the truth is, the more you write, the more you experience, you know nothing. The less you know. I mean, that's a common thing people say, but it's true. And I think that taking down your prejudices and to really just be a blank slate and to write down everything you see, like take notes all the time. You're going to develop those muscles almost like you're working out. That's really helped for me, is to, even if I do have like a knee-jerk thing that I think when I see someone, I will write it down. And those are the beauties. That's the stuff where, like, if you're good at conversation, you're like, oh, I should have wrote down that thing, or oh, I told so-and-so that thing the other day. Write it down. that's all stuff that you might one day see in your book.
So you're always collecting ideas. You're always pushing yourself forward, coming up with new, interesting ways to be creative.
One of my friends know it too.
Yeah.
You just get that quiet, kind of pensive look on your face. We don't put that. No, don't put that in your books.
Hey, Corey. No. Yeah. Yeah. You need like a disclaimer shirt. I'm collecting information for my next book, just so you know.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And everybody's like, hey, wait. Am I going to show up in your next thing? Yeah, you might.
Everything's fair game.
Yeah. You're in the public space.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. Yeah. It's interesting. How about one thing I try to encourage my listeners to do is when they buy books from authors is to leave a great review. Beyond great book, great author. Like, thanks. That's kind of you, but can you give a little more detail? What does that mean for you to hear back from readers when they read your books? What does that do for you?
I mean, if it's a good review, that's great. I'm glad I hit that nerve. I'm glad I was able to provide that source of entertainment or possibly, hopefully, enlightenment. If it's a bad review, I get angry, and then I quickly calm down and I look at the criticism and see if it's valid. And some criticism is valid. Like my first book. Like one of the reasons why I have a hard time suggesting my first book is it's a bit wordy. Like I was really married to the idea of making really deliberate and elaborate sentences and to construct these things, like they were in a lab because I wanted to, I wanted to. But as you write, and that's where the editing comes in, accessibility, like I said, to be understood is far more important than just like dazzling someone with wordplay. So and there's, again, like another criticism I'd received was that, from reviewers, professional and amateur, was like the book starts off a little slow. I like a slow burn myself. I like easing into a story, kind of like an old man into a jacuzzi. However, a lot of people don't.
You just did it again. You did it again. Keep going.
A lot of people don't have that attention span, and you got to grab them within the first thing. It's like 8 pages, but it should be like 8 paragraphs because like people really don't have a lot of patience these days. And yeah, so like I love seeing it. And then sometimes you read a review and you're just like, what were you worded? Huh? But then you're also, it's open, like you just said, it's public domain. So like, it's almost like anybody walking by like a piece, some graffiti on the bricks can say like, oh, it's nicer. Yeah, it's a little sloppy, and that's their opinion. So you realize everybody's got one.
Because as you're talking, I have Coward up on my screen. I'm just kind of scrolling through some of the comments, and it just reaffirms for me what I'm hearing you do here on the podcast. You're not really doing it; it's who you are. But like the one person wrote, like 5-star review, obviously, but it says the book is a high level of imagery that'll knock your socks off. And the character development is amazing. The imagery as you talk here with me, Corey, that's what I would say. Just hearing you kind of describe how you process things, I would completely agree with that review. That's you. I love that.
I think that like one of my favorite things is like you can go on about like the decor of something or the smell of something, but oftentimes I find that it's picking out sometimes 1 cent, and then really just being able to evince that in a most descriptive but still kind of brief way possible. You know what I mean? Like there's these certain feelings that we all kind of get that we don't talk about, or my favorite reaction is to have that silent nod where someone fully gets it and they almost bounce their chin off their sternum. They're like, you know what I mean? Like like I've had that before. You know what I mean? And that's the beauty to me is like, I like to, throughout you scatter these, this taste, smell, touch, and all that. Like those are hugely important because it makes someone feel like they're there. You just have to do it wisely and judiciously and not overdo it, you know?
Who was it that said to you, Corey, you should write? Like you should put pen to paper or get on your whatever. You should be a writer. Was there somebody that actually crossed your path and said that to you, or was this all self-discovered?
I mean, I've worked with the public for a while. So I've had people before I was writing would be like, "Oh, you should write that," or like I was told like I should be like you should be doing something with this. You know what I mean? Like in whatever form. So I'd always wanted to, but never got around to it because I was very lazy. And so it wasn't one person in particular. And to be fair, the people who told me that I should, it kind of, it's small galvanized my desire to, but it mostly came from just, I needed a creative outlet and I can't paint. And I've always loved reading and the like language and words and just the poetry of being able to the communicating through poetic means, I suppose, because like I'm not a big talker in my real life. Like I'm pretty reserved and I'll listen about somebody forever and a day, but like doesn't mean I'm going to give them any information. But all of a sudden you start writing and you're like it's like a universe expanding on a page, but it's your own thoughts and feelings, and you realize so much about yourself in the process.
Do you ever step back and look at something that you've been writing and go, "Wow, where's that coming from? Like that's me. Like that came from me."
Yeah.
It makes you kind of go, like sobering in a sense. Though I can't believe that came from my brain, my thoughts.
Yeah. I try, I look at certain things and like, I try to never get, I'm a hard person to please. So like at the end of a story, by the time I hit the end of a story, like if I'm writing it, I'm usually not sick of it, but like I'm ready to do something else, and there's certain things where like, oh, that's cool. Like, there's certain turns of phrase. Cause I still get, I'm a word guy. So like some things I look at, I'm like, I'm happy with that. But what's really weird is people psychoanalyzing you through your stories and then referring to the main character as you. That time you did this, like I didn't do that. That was a character. Like that's the crazy part is people like making kind of and having their decisions or their opinions about you as a human being informed by things that you write. I try not to like psychoanalyze myself through my writing because Lord knows that, that's a heap that's better designed for the furnace. But yeah, I just think it's funny. Yeah. Like, or for me, like what I also do is probably pretty annoying is if I'm talking to someone about like, oh, did you notice that? Because you embed, you sew in so many Easter eggs and little hidden emeralds. And you're just like, well, I wonder if people will find that, And that's a cool part. I mean, like, it's just, there's so many little things like you do and you know why. And sometimes people see things and you don't know why. And that's even trippier.
So for somebody who's not wired the way you are, Corey, is there a way to develop that process? Or do you think it's kind of like innate to who you are and it's a light switch you can't shut off? Like, can we learn how to be like more like this?
In what way in particular do you reckon?
I'm just thinking like there's somebody that would love to be more thoughtful, more creative, and they look at you and they listen to you and they read your books and they're like, I feel so surface level when I compare myself to Corey, and the fact that I want to write at a deeper level. I don't want to just be surface level in what I'm putting out there. You're not, there's nothing about you that's surface level. You're very thoughtful and deep and right, introspective. Is there any way that we can develop those things if that's not our natural gift?
I think, I mean, like it's a confluence of a couple of things. I mean, like since I was a child, I was always pretty quiet, pretty reserved. I kept a lot of stuff in. Like I'm born in 84. And I think that 80s babies, especially like, depending where you grow up, you're like the last of like the cowboys, the desperados, and you keep a lot of stuff in at the at the sake of for the sake of trying to look tough or macho. And that, as we've learned in these last couple of years, does a lot of harm to the psyche and to the soul, right? Now, I'm not one to get into that kind of debate, but all I can tell you is when I kind of like, put the pencil into my heart, it just kept bleeding. It still is, and all people mostly see is what kind of drips off the elbow. So for me, for me, writing is battling the anxieties that I've had my whole life and being open and not lying to myself. And I realized as I write, I lied to myself a lot. Like, we oftentimes play the hero in our own story, right? We got to be the protagonist. We're the main character, but, we're not without fault. And I think a lot of us brush past it or find ways to cope by, saying like, oh, we did this for a reason, or there's a motivation behind this. But when you're writing, if you're truly writing, if you're really, bearing your soul, you're gonna have to bare your teeth to it, some of the things that you've done and what you've thought in life, because you're a villain sometimes too. If you want to be a cool anti-hero, that's, I guess, your MO. But like when I write, like I go through incredible bouts of depression sometimes. I mean, I'm kind of a depressive person to begin with, but like my mood changes. Like the weather vane will point whichever way depending on the nature of my writing, and my writing is oftentimes quite tragic, so I bear that weight a lot. And I think the creativity part is from me growing up not having ways aside from like sport, I guess, to get that energy out. I never had a creative outlet, you know what I mean? My whole life I had all that stuff inside me that was just coming out in the strangest of ways. Maybe it influences the way that I talk or the way that I see things. I don't know. But like, I think it's to kind of improve that is, one is to, be open, and two is to see the world, through your eyes and not try to conform to someone else's particular prescription of lenses. I think other than that, I mean, you gotta be honest. If you're gonna make art, you gotta be honest.
So my podcast is called Living the Next Chapter. And so I framed it around that for a reason, because I think as authors and creative people, we're always kind of working or thinking or dreaming about the next thing that's coming. When you look at 4 books out in the world, do you look at each book as a finish line? Like you got there, you got to the end of the book, you wrote the book, you produced it, you're done? Or like it's like a final finished product? Or do you just think of them as like stepping stones to the next thing? So you're always kind of creating, you're always doing the next thing.
Yeah, I'm thinking about tomorrow's supper during breakfast, because like I'm always writing. There's always stuff in my head that needs to get out. And this might not sound like the most reassuring thing, but I actually, with every release, I actually sort of get sad because you work so hard to get to that point in time when the book comes out, and then you have no control over how it does. It's you do in the sense of being forewarned is forearmed kind of thing, but in the sense of like, will the public like it? Will they see it? Are your strategies or your marketing tactics going to hit? It's like when I was in university, I felt great because I had this thing that I was looking forward to. And after I graduated, cats would be throwing jobs at me like wedding rice. And oh my God, the world was my oyster. I just had to shuck it, And then you graduate and you're like, oh, well, nothing's changed. I'm just a dude with a piece of paper that was rolled up in a square hat. So it's like when a book comes out, like it's depressing. I feel deflated because now it's on to the next one. And like, it's never going to live up to where I want it to. You know what I mean? No one's going to come and hoist you on their shoulders and be like, hey, this guy right here, he's the one, or this story rather. I'd rather the story succeed than myself. But no, I always feel extremely, I get like pretty down for the next little bit after, because you build it up. It's built up to that. And then a day later, a week later, it comes back, like the excitement comes back, especially when people start reading it and you get feedback and like, oh, that's amazing. Oh, I think it's cool. Thank you very much. Oh, let's talk about, let's chop it up, over coffee or something. But no, like I find it's not underwhelming, but like I almost get devastated by that feeling.
That's really interesting perspective. I don't think I've heard anybody say that before.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, then for me, it's just there's more work. I cannot. I cannot put a wreath over my neck. When I'm done something, because there's more to do. There's more stories to tell. And now I just have less time. You know what I mean? So it's like a race against there's a scythe tapping on the cafe window. You know what I mean? Like, let's go. We got finish your breakfast. We got to run.
It's like getting to the finish line and it says start.
Exactly.
You're like, okay,
And that's not the worst thing, like the fact that like you have more, you have that, your engine is still running hot, you just, it makes me feel eager because like, you're not just going to rest on your laurels and you're not just going to, recline on this and like time to take a break. You know what I mean? Like, sure, it's cool. And like, yeah, go have supper, whatever you do to celebrate it. But like on to the next one because there's so much more. You know what I mean? And Lord forbid that you ever, or anybody ever kind of runs out of ideas. You know what I mean? Because that's, to me, that's almost, that'd be terrifying.
Yeah. It's an interesting perspective. Yeah, because you build it all up, you work through it, it gets out there in the world. Again, you lose control of the results in that point. And but at the same time, I guess there's got to be some sort of joy that opens the door for something new.
The joy, I mean, there's small victories after that, like, the sales or some reviews, and you try and set yourself up to, I mean, those are almost straw men that you're setting up, it's like, for me, I don't, like I said, I'm not super acquainted with happiness. And for me, even if I try and downplay any optimism, I'm still going to have those butterflies in the tummy, and you're still going to be like, okay, well, I know that it's not going to be a New York Times bestseller, but maybe, you know what I mean? And you have that in the back of your head, you try and shove it in the closet, but there's still that, hey, this might be something big. So it's one of those things where for me, it gets built up always. And then there's no chance, there's no other possibility, but somewhat of a letdown. So I try and keep as stoic of a demeanor as possible when it comes to that stuff and just remain more on the content side to continue creating and to continue having ideas. You know what I mean? Like, I would still, if like I wasn't able to publish or share my work, it would still probably sit down and write every day or write poetry or write whatever, because there's, again, like, I don't know how not to not do that. It's bigger than me. It just flows through me. it's just my hands it goes through, but I don't know where it comes from.
So again, as we kind of look back over the reviews and stuff, Corey, there's a lot of people that have a lot of very poignant praise for you. Like, there's some really very detailed information. You're really connecting with an audience. There's people who are saying, like, I'm a slow reader and I didn't know if this book would be for me, and I devoured it over the course of a weekend. So, like, there's people who really identify with all that you're doing. Before we go, I'd love to kind of just flip the mic over to you and let you just kind of address your community. These people, they're showing up for you. There's value in what you're doing, and they love what you do. So what would you like to say to the people that have purchased your book, will be purchasing your book? Like, in the sense of community, what's your message to the people that really find this very valuable to them as reader?
Well, I mean, one of the things I always think of every time I'm able to connect with a reader possibly is we're basically all the same person. We're all the same being, you know what I mean? And we all feel the same things. There's like these big, capital letter emotions, happy, sad, mournful, guilty, all these things that we all feel the same, but we don't all communicate them the same. And we don't all have the ability to communicate these same things outward. We feel them, we internalize them, they make our guts rot, or they raise our spirits, but now we can't necessarily, vocalize them or create them. We don't know how. No one's ever put clay in our hands. No one's ever put a brush in our hands. And we might not have an extensive vocabulary, but my thing, what makes art connect with me and how I believe that I connect with other people is that in our, metaphorical heart, we have a little lock on it, right? And that lock needs a key. And that key has to have its teeth cut in a very specific way to really make us feel and to have that true feeling of empathy. See, I don't believe in empathy as a thing. I believe it's something we learn. I believe it's a learned reaction as a child, but it's something that we have to undergo, hardships, and to really connect on human beings with the beyond, physical level to really understand and experience. Now, for me, Crime and Punishment had that, that teeth cut in just that way, where there was a particular passage and I was like, whoa, that got me. And that's not something I've ever said before. Like, I've enjoyed things. I've been entertained by things, but I've never felt truly understood. And it was by a Russian guy who was dead for over 100 years. You know what I mean? Like, who would have thought? So for me, I try to sharpen my key. I try to cut the teeth in a way where I'm a weirdo. There's a lot of weirdos out there who have a hard time expressing their emotions or, becoming vulnerable and just opening their arms to new experiences or people. So I offered my key, the one that, comes in this verbal form, this written form. And I try and give that to people so that they don't just understand me, but they can open that and understand themselves. Because if I didn't read that one passage, I never would have kind of opened up to the possibility that art existed out there, which really kind of connected with me. And since then, and in a, in a constantly evolving way, I've been able to enjoy things on a deeper level. I don't necessarily go out of my way to consume art or media to be entertained as much as to be rattled, to have my bones smashed and my nerves, knotted. That's the feeling. That's being really alive, is to feel things, whether you can express it or share it or not. So for anyone who's read my stuff, you're weirdos and I love you. And for anyone who hasn't, there's a open pair of weirdo arms waiting for you, kind of thing. And we're just collecting ghosts out here, I suppose.
Corey, I love listening to you. Like, I just, again, artists paint with paint. They work with clay. You work with words, and you really have a gift. So thank you for sharing your gift with us as an author, and I'm excited. What's coming up next for you? What can we anticipate in the future? Something's got to be brewing.
Yeah. I mean, right now I'm still dealing with like the fallout from the launch. So that'll be kind of going on for a bit. I'm trying to figure out different ways to get the book out there, because what I've always done is rush to the next one. Aside from the last book, it was released during COVID. So it was kind of kneecapped from the starting line. So for this book, I really want to spend a lot of time just kind of, hammering it home to people, trying to get people reading it, because it's also the first of a series, and I want that to, I want a flaming hot start to that, just to kind of build the readership, build an understanding of the lore that will kind of continue throughout. I do have a book or it's a novella rather, because it's pretty short. It's like 50,000 words that I'd like to put out, but I'm deciding how to do that and when the time would be right. I mean, if it was up to me, I would just give everything I had away, just, hire a Goodyear blimp and start throwing, pages out. But that's not the way business works, apparently. So I have those two. I'm writing a different story right now. I'm going to start editing part 2 of of Scumbag Rehab's kind of first follow-up. There's quite a few parts to that. And then, there's a lot of, there's the stone ain't going, you ain't going to gather any moss, put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Awesome. Corey, thank you so much for being part of the podcast and making time to do this. I hope that being a guest on podcasts and getting your voice out there, letting people connect with you in a way like this will definitely help people to be more engaged maybe with your books, or go, hey, I know somebody's going to love this. I'm just going to buy it and gift it to them because I know they're going to fall in love with you as an author. And I think the more we can hear you and connect with you in this way will definitely be something that serves you as an author in the future as well. Because 5 years from now, somebody's going to press play on this episode for the first time and go, wow, I need this in my life. So I'm glad that we have a chance to do this together.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate all the kind words. And I quite enjoy doing this. I love talking with, like minds about, wonderful things. So I can't thank you enough for having me on.
It's great. Everyone, all the information for Corey is in the show notes as always. We'll have links to his website and to the books. Please go out and buy them. And like we said, when you buy the books, wherever you get them, please leave a great review. Let people know why this book means something to you and what you got out of it, because it helps Corey. It helps others to make that purchase decision and go, yeah, this is the right book for me. Just reading the amazing reviews you have already, you get a really good picture of who these books really resonate with. Mm-hmm. So it's great. So everyone, thank you for leaving those reviews, but continue doing that and do that for all of our authors. Again, Corey, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for being here for the Living the Next Chapter podcast. So glad to have you as part of our family of listeners. There's a seat for you just here on Living the Next Chapter, and I'm so happy that you have listened to all the way to the end. Wow, you are now my new bestie. I want to let you know that I host 7 other podcasts on top of Living the Next Chapter. Yep, 8 total. One of them is called the How To Podcast series. If you are thinking, you know what, Dave, this podcast thing seems like a lot of fun, well, I'll give you a secret. It is. It's a great, amazing, fun time where you can get to meet great people, get your word out there, promote your book, promote what your coaching program, whatever you're doing. Podcasting is great. And if you want to learn how to do this, what you're hearing right now, head over to howtopodcast.ca and look up the How to Podcast series on YouTube, whatever app you're listening on. You'll find me there. And I'd love for you to come listen to how to do this. And if you're interested and have questions on how to podcast, reach out to me at howtopodcast.ca. Thank you for listening. Talk soon.